Our guest today is the treasurer for the city of Chicago. He is the steward of the city of Chicago's $7 billion investment portfolio. Our guest today also serves as a trustee or fiduciary on 4 of the 5 city public employee pension boards with nearly $25 billion under management. He is a lifelong Chicago resident and a graduate of Whitney Young High School. He earned his undergraduate degree from Washington University and his MBA from Harvard. And he's so smart that he brought his wife, Helen, today. Let's give her a round of applause. Like all my friends here, he married up significantly. Ladies and gentlemen, Kurt Summers. Kurt?
Thank you. Thank you, Jay, and thank you to everyone for being here. A number of you have commented on the fact that I'm sporting a beard right now, and I have 4 words for you: happy wife, happy life. So it'll be here for a little while longer. Thank you all for being here with me today. I'm going to try and go quickly in honor of the time and the tradition of the City Club, and there's a lot of material here that I want to go through, and it's for me. I hope my hope for today is that it is as inspiring for you to do something about it as it was for me. You'll notice that the title of today's talk is a play on the great Burnham Plan, which this title is a plan for all of Chicago. Tackling Chicago's single largest impediment to reaching its full potential. Three years ago, almost to the date, I was sworn in at 10 a.m., and at noon I came here to the City Club, my first day in office. And those of you who were here might remember that we handed out a document entitled Investing in Our Chicago. And in there we made a bold claim that our office will be focused on leveraging Chicago's economic power to increase investment in its residents, workers, businesses, and neighborhoods. Full stop, without exclusion. I'm happy to say that in the last 3 years, the state of Chicago's economic engine is quite strong. We have a large, diverse, and growing economy that rivals sizable nations with a over $600 billion gross regional product. That would make us the 23rd largest economy in the world. We are the #1 city for business expansions and relocations for 4 straight years, the #1 city for foreign direct investment. We've had 20% growth in our Fortune 500 companies. And next year, small businesses in Chicago, 77% of them, expect to see growth in the economy. By all measures, at the macro level, we're doing exceedingly well. In addition, our fiscal situation has improved. I didn't want to bore anyone with a bunch of slides on the current situation, but what I will say before I get into some boring slides on the current situation is we just rated one of our first AAA bond ratings in the city's near history, midterm history, long-term history. We've eliminated the practice of scoop and toss, which is a financial engineering mechanism to just put today's debt on tomorrow. We've raised revenue and gotten on a path to paying our obligations, and every year we've closed more and more of our systemic budget gap. We have made positive strides from a fiscal perspective. However, our debt is still staggering at over $68 billion. And the growth of that, as you can see, more than doubling in less than 15 years. Our balance sheet obligations are squeezing our income statement. Our total government debt in the last decade has grown by over $10 billion. Our annual debt service is now nearly $1 billion of our budget. And versus 15 years ago, our 30-year debt obligations will now cost us $15 billion more. Next year, 22% of our operating budget will be used for debt service. And even at $35.8 billion, the net pension liability doesn't tell the whole story. We assume a rate of return at 7.5%. We're currently 8.5 years into an economic cycle, which would make it one of the longest positive economic expansions in the history of the country. Anyone who believes that for the next 8.5 years, the market will continue to rise, we will continue to grow, I got a bridge to sell you here in Chicago. The volatility of that market, as we saw in 2008, will have an even greater impact this time. We have outstanding healthcare litigation with our retirees, and we have assumptions in our liabilities around wages, mortality, and inflation that may not stand the test of time. What that means is there's still nearly $1 billion gap annually in known funding requirements. So it seems as though as much progress as our economy has made, as great of a job as we've done at getting our fiscal house in order, these fiscal challenges continue to persist. And we must ask the question, why? And it's for much of the same reason that when I started this journey over 3 years ago, we wanted to focus on all of our neighborhoods and focus on all of our residents and focus on all of our businesses. Because as you look at the growth of our obligations, our net pension liability, our pension liability, our bonds, our primary debt, all of them are outpacing our household income. This is the classic debt trap that we saw in Greece and we saw in Puerto Rico. When you have debt that is growing and it is outpacing the growth of your economy, you can no longer keep up with it. The reality is, though, that some parts are growing. And today's conversation is really going to be about who's growing and who's not and why it's unique to Chicago. I'm going to pass a couple of the, like I said, boring slides and get to a fun one. Many of you were at the Economic Club dinner last week, and I'd like to quote our president by saying that we can't have only half the city doing well if we want to be a global city. We can't grow in a way that is consistent with our opportunity, with the natural assets, and the God-given ability of the people of this city if we are leaving nearly half of the city behind. Now, many of you may know that the president is one of my inspirations. I have another inspiration, Wayne Whalen knows, and Jay Doherty knows, my mom, Sherry Wilson, my sister, Sharice Allen, they know, that I keep another inspiration on my phone. It's a picture of my grandfather. Now, a lot of you who know me know the importance that he meant to me in my life as a role model, as a patriarch, as a activist, as a person who stood up for the community and fought for what was fair. What you may not know is the reason why I keep that particular picture, because there are a lot of them that I have to choose from, on my phone and what it reminds me of. So I'm going to show you. That picture is from my grandfather's 1983 race for 3rd Ward Alderman. And it's a reminder. I keep this on my desk, and I keep it on my phone. And the 3rd Ward is the ward that I grew up in and that my family still lives in today. It's a reminder that nearly 35 years ago, the platform for the neighborhood I grew up in, Bronzeville, the neighborhood where my family lives in, the neighborhood that gave us Harold Washington and John Stroger and Sam Patch, and a host of others. The platform then was to address unemployment, to address the quality of education, to have affordable housing, to build up the retail corridors of 47th and 51st Street, to deal with the issues of crime in our community and police misconduct. You could copy and paste that to any platform for any politician running in the city of Chicago today, or the state of Illinois, or the county of Cook. It's a reminder to me that we have to be different, and that we have to make the change that we seek last. Today we're going to talk about the real state of our cities. And I use cities plural because we're often referred to as a tale of two cities. The state of increased inequality in Chicago is far greater than the US, and it is the key to the future prosperity of the city, and it's the answer to the question that our challenges persist despite our progress because of inequality in income, unemployment, poverty, home ownership, access to capital, education, and ultimately net worth. I believe that this is a crucible moment for our leadership, and it's going to define what kind of city we will become. Let me show you what I mean about how things are different in Chicago. So this is a chart looking at the United States median income by race. As you can see, there's disparity that exists in our country, to no one's surprise. And that disparity hits two groups the hardest, also not a shock to anyone in this room. And it's something that we should all generally fight to solve for, to have a better, more equitable society. Now let's look at Chicago. By the way, I Christmas themed this on purpose. If you look at Chicago, an interesting thing happens. The gap widens, and it widens substantially. And the set of winners and losers get determined pretty quickly. As you can see, the gap between African American households and the top category household, which would be Asian American homes, was $34,000 at the US level. In Chicago, it's $42,000. Difference of 90% versus a difference of 140% almost. With Latino homes, we see some improvement. With Asian American homeowners, they go from being the top category to having a decline when it comes to the city of Chicago. And the gap is significant relative to each one of those, not just in and of themselves, but relative to the rest of the country. It's not that there's something in the water here, I don't think, but we have a real dynamic and a real shift that when we go through these numbers, I want you to think about what it means to be in the red category, to have your income be 136% less than the next person. To be 440% more likely or 300% more likely to be in poverty. Again, when you look at the poverty rate, the same peculiar thing happens. Chicago far outpaces the rest of the country. In white households in the city, poverty rate is lower. Black households, higher. Asian households, higher. Latino households, slightly better. But the gap in every case has gotten greater. So I'm going to be going back and forth here a little bit. Remember, your income is less than half of another category. You have 3 to 5 times the propensity of being in poverty. The unemployment rate, U.S., let's just look at this for a second. There's only one category where we have lower unemployment here than we do in the rest of the U.S. In every other race, unemployment is higher. And not only is it higher, but the disparity between the groups is that much higher. Over 250% higher for African Americans, over 115% higher for Latinos. Less than half the income, 3 to 4 times higher poverty rate, 1 to 2.5 times higher unemployment. Now here was the kicker. This one really got me. When you look at net worth, in the US, the disparity exists. White households have 13.8 times more net worth than black households, 10.1 times more net worth than Latino households. But when you go to Chicago, the disparity with black households is 29.4 times. With Latino households, 10.9 times. This disparity and the combination of what's happening with the income statement and the balance sheet means that not only are we at a time and at a period where the net worth is next to zero, at its lowest state since the early 1980s. The disparity is greater than it's been since World War II in the city of Chicago. And it's not just with these statistics. If you look at childhood poverty, 44% of African Americans, children below the age of 18, live in poverty, versus 16% in white households. 34% of African Americans in the city of Chicago rely on food stamps or the SNAP program. That's more than double the national average. This applies to median home values. It applies to college graduation rates. The disparity is greater here than anywhere else. The economic contribution from fully 2/3 of our city is not there. It's not there at the rate and at the level that it should be or would be if we were only to be reflective of the rest of the country. To answer the question of why, and why do these fiscal challenges still exist? Why do we keep having these problems? Why doesn't our economy keep up with our spending? Yes, we need to have more controls. Yes, we need to have fiscal stewardship and responsibility. But we also need to invest in ways that, like our president said, make sure that half of our city has the same opportunity the other half has. I'd venture to say that in these statistics, I'm not talking about a single person in this room, but I may be talking about some people in this room, family members, including me, to no fault of their own. And we continue to ask the question, why? I'm not calling anyone insane, but we keep asking ourselves the same question when the data is smacking us across our head. I didn't get into the educational gap, partly because we have an incoming new school CEO who's a dear friend of mine, and I want her to start off on a good foot without me banging her right away, but also because we have a great model in Tin King and Urban Prep in the building. I'd like to give them a round of applause. I'm going to get to solutions like that. As we explore how we got here, persistent policies supporting segregation and hindering access to capital, as there have been plenty of studies on, a lack of an integrated and comprehensive economic development priority, and truly a lack of long-term fiscal planning that's rooted in economic reality. So how do we solve the problem? I actually think, I don't know if there's anyone from JP Morgan Chase here. Is there anyone from JP Morgan Chase? Dan, okay. Here's your shout out for the day. No offense to the other banks. Thanks to the work of Prosperity Now and the $40 million commitment from JP Morgan Chase to the city of Chicago, there was some important research that was done that led to some of the facts and figures that you showed. But one of the most interesting things that I think that the organization that they partner with provided us is a pretty clear framework for what you do about it and what a healthy, equitable economy that has residents working and contributing, sharing the burden and sharing the opportunity. Here's what it requires. It requires opportunities to learn, to earn, to save, and to own. I had a mentor once who said to me, life is about learn, earn, and return. That's kind of how I view this. The return is when you have saved and you can own a business, you can own a stock portfolio. I see Rendell Solomon there. You can own a home, you can own your own future. You can't get there if you haven't learned and you haven't had the opportunity to earn. And what we see very clearly is without that, we are stifled as a city. We are fighting the fight of fiscal responsibility, of competing in a global marketplace, of trying to be a destination for companies around the world, and we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. We don't have all of our talent fighting with us. And in fact, for the last century, we have kept them out of the fight entirely, whether purposefully or through omission and negligence. The reality is we can't win this fight with one arm tied behind our back, with 2/3 of our residents struggling with abject poverty, economic disparity, wealth disparity, unlike any other in the country, and unlike any other that we have seen since World War II. We can't win that way. This is the path forward. So who does this well? Fear not, there are examples. We don't have to recreate the wheel. The city of Baltimore did something novel. They created a 10-year plan that said, we're going to invest in our economy in a way that is driven by economic projections, driven by data, and the decisions that we make in our operating budgets, in our capital budgets, in our balance sheet will support our income statement. And we will specifically look over the next decade at the areas, and we will look exclusively at the areas that need investment the most. Because it's the greatest opportunity to benefit the entire community. When you invest where economic need is greatest, and by virtue of that opportunity is greatest, it creates the best opportunity for the entire community. They've figured that out. The state of California has figured that out through their pension funds and through their insurance commission. even the private sector is beginning to figure out how to take advantage where our biases have led us to have a lack of investment. I'll point to the top left there. There's a new venture capital fund called Rise of the Rest. How many of you guys know who Steve Case is? The founder of AOL. Steve Case has a basic premise. 3/4 of the venture capital in this country goes to 3 states, leaving the other 47 states to fend for themselves with the other 25%. So he went to some pretty bright financial minds, like the Pritzker family, like Michael Milken, like Henry Kravis, like Warren Buffett, like the Waltons, and he said, hey guys, I don't know if you know this, but there's an entire country in between these 2 coasts. There are a lot of opportunities there, and all of our capital has been missing it. And if the nation is going to compete with the rest of the world, guess what we can't do anymore? We can't overlook the rest of the population because we're focused on downtown Chicago, or because we're focused on Lincoln Park, or because we're focused on the Gold Coast, or we're focused on where the traditional capital has flowed. He made that case over the course of the last year and got 20 billionaires to invest capital in the rise of the rest, in the investment in the flyover states, in the opportunity where capital, for whatever reason, and this one has nothing to do with race or ethnicity, it's just bias. Smart people go to New York, right? They go to LA and California and San Francisco. You gotta be in the Valley. Well, there are great entrepreneurs and great opportunities in the middle of the country. Folks are figuring this out. And in order for us to win, in order for us to compete, and in order for us to be a global city as we hope to be, that's what we have to do. I'm gonna close by talking about just a few things that we're doing in my office that's consistent with creating these opportunities. One is the Chicago Catalyst Fund. We have a couple board members here. I see Richard Price and Juan Avila. Thank you for being here. A tremendous board of an organization that has a simple for-profit purpose. We're taking $100 million of your money and adding with it $200 million of private sector money from hopefully folks like JP Morgan Chase and Fifth Third and Citibank. I'm going to call every other bank I see here to invest outside of downtown Chicago, to invest in the rest, to create economic opportunity and put capital where it has not been sought for as long as anyone in this room can remember. That structure is a unique one, the first of its kind in the nation. I'm proud to say we have our first board meeting next week, and we'll have much more to announce in the coming year. That's the type of intentional capital infusion that's taken. Another initiative that we launched in partnership with my office is something called Simple Growth, simplegrowth.biz, which is a basic online lender with CDFI's approved lenders and partners like the WBDC. I see Hetty and Emily here. Thank you for being here. To provide up to $500,000 in easy, affordable loans and financial products to our small businesses in Chicago, so they are not preyed on by the online lenders in the world, who now comprise of 20% of the capital markets for small businesses. Illinois Service Federal, the very first black-owned bank in the city of Chicago, founded in 1934, and unfortunately the last black-owned bank in the city of Chicago. In September, we made the largest deposit in the history of that bank, $20 million. Now, I manage a $7.5 billion portfolio. That was $20 million, and it was the largest deposit in their history. Since then, They've garnered another $10 million just in the last 3 months, $10 million of deposits, and 2017 will be their first profitable year in the last decade. Investing in our communities, providing safe, affordable access to capital, to companies, to individuals, supporting our local financial institutions, and finally, I'll leave with providing access to home ownership. One of the things folks in this room may not know, I'm the chair of the Chicago Infrastructure Trust, and we launched about 1.5 years ago a home ownership assistance program that's entirely made to help all home buyers, not just first-time home buyers, but working families purchase their first home, their next home, invest in their existing home. Very quietly, this program has led to 190 new homeowners in the city of Chicago. We currently have 25 open loans and another 112 folks who are looking to purchase that are pre-approved. We've generated opportunities for nearly $70 million of housing stock to change hands, and for buyers to actually have the opportunity to impact the single most important decision with respect to net worth that they will make, which is their home purchase. The diversity of this program is consistent with the diversity of the city of Chicago, and it's something that we can all be very proud of. These are the steps that we're taking in our office: investing in our community, providing affordable access to capital, supporting our local institutions, and providing a path to home ownership so that we can learn, earn, and return, and once and for all, solve the single biggest issue that plagues our city. Thank you.
Well, rather daring and quite a challenge and interesting. So now we have time for some questions of our treasurer. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. Alex. Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Okay, are you ready, Kurt? Excellent. The first question comes from Lennox Jackson, who's affiliated with Urban Equities, Inc. The question is, what is the time horizon for selection of fund managers that will align with the Catalyst Fund?
Can I see this for a second?
Sure.
This was pre-printed, so this person came prepared. The time horizon is first order of business for our board meeting the end of next week is to approve an RFP for our investment consultant. That will take place over the course of the next 30 to 60 days. Once that consultant is selected, their first order of business within 90 days is to select our fund managers, our partners, who will then be able to put capital to work in the city of Chicago.
Great. Another pre-submitted question. Steve Brown, who's with the State Treasurer's Office. And we asked if he's a member. He put down no with an exclamation point. I think we'll have to talk to the treasurer. Okay. His question is, high-impact programs like drug court or housing first demonstrate effectiveness, reduce suffering, and dramatically reduce public expenditure. Can Chicago play a leadership role in enabling innovative financing strategies like Pay for Success?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. I think things like social impact bonds in Chicago have gotten a bad rap because they were positioned as you're making a bet on kindergartners. And I think that that's unfortunate because it may scare off capital from putting it where it belongs, which is toward models for success that, as I just showed you, the government, strapped as it is, doesn't have the capital to invest in. I think we have plenty of opportunities, ample opportunities, to pursue models like that bring private capital to bear, but also to look at our own balance sheet and do things like what we're doing with the Catalyst Fund, where we say we have a mandate to invest this money in South America, the Middle East, East Asia, Western Europe, everywhere but the third largest market and the largest economy in the world, which you happen to be sitting in. There's a problem that we use our balance sheet that way, that we use our income statement, our operating funds, without intention and without the specification that they are meant to improve where the need is the greatest. And I think we have an opportunity to do that going forward.
Okay. This is from Peter Highland regarding sales tax bonds, where the revenue projections to support the new debt service scored on a static or dynamic basis. Please explain.
Well, you'll have to ask the ratings agencies how they scored them. But I think that we have had stable sales tax collection for the last couple decades. And the number that was used, I believe, was $664 million to support debt capacity of up to $2.4 billion. I've actually had extensive conversations with the ratings agencies, and they feel strongly that that this structure supports that capacity. I would also point out, given that she's in the audience, to President Preckwinkle's credit, in 2011, Cook County passed issued its sales tax bonds to create its first ever, 6 years ago, AAA rated sales tax bond without a bankruptcy remote vehicle. And I think that's something that, she's led the way on and shown leadership that we can now follow, and it's a proven example that will work.
It was Kurt's idea.
Okay, so now we know about the Summers-Preckwinkle Treaty. Okay. This is from Jamalita Tillman, who's with the Harold Washington Cultural Center. How can the arts community take advantage of the economic growth of the $7 billion, considering we contribute $3 billion to Chicago's economy?
Yeah. Look, I think that we have opportunities in our neighborhoods to provide arts and entertainment and hospitality in unique ways. And I think that there are great business models that exist in other parts of the country where this has been developed and developed quite well in neighborhood environments outside of the downtown central business district environment. And that's where I think cultural venues and where sort of unique arts and entertainment business opportunities can flourish. So the answer to that is, I think, coming. The opportunity will be less of, I think, a traditional nonprofit model, but truly a for-profit model that serves to a unique set of consumers that reside in that neighborhood or will be drawn there because of the program.
Okay, thank you. This is from City Club member Len Dominguez, who's with Educare Assistance. How does the City of Chicago, your office, work with CPS, public schools, to help alleviate the financial situation at CPS?
My office doesn't. And I would say, amongst us friends, much to my chagrin. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for us all to help our school system and our new leader, who will need a lot of help. I think they get a great deal of support from the city of Chicago. This year, in this year's budget, I think they got $80 million of support directly, so from all of you. But there are opportunities that we've talked about in the past with predecessor CEOs that we would be excited to engage with the new CEO around things like managing their investment portfolio. The reality is, our investment portfolio is multiples the size of CPS's. We make thousands of trades a year, and last year we made $125 million. This year it's close enough to the end of the year. I can tell you we're going to make around $115 million, maybe a little more. We're really good at this, and we can do it for the Chicago Public Schools at less cost and make them more money. So that's one of the opportunities that we'll be pursuing with the new CEO.
Great. A question from one of the gentlemen here with Urban Prep.
All right.
I'll probably butcher your name, but I apologize. Kayode Balogun, is that close? Terrific.
He's like, I'm used to it.
Chess and checkers, okay. Horseshoes. Now that we know all the problems with Chicago's economic disparities, what are the most important actions that should immediately take place?
Yeah. I think I'm just going to go back to this. You guys are a part of it, but I believe that the actions that we take as a city, the actions that we take in the philanthropic community, the actions that we take as a civic society and group around our government leaders and around these problems need to lean hard in these areas, in areas where we see educational gap, economic gap, achievement gap, wealth gap. In that study, by the way, that the precursor to the study that J.P. Morgan funded was one that was funded by MacArthur and the Chicago Community Trust. And it's called The Cost of Segregation. And I think a number of partners here may have participated in it. You may remember from that study, there was a fascinating statistic that said that if we were just to close the household income gap with African Americans, not with white families in the city of Chicago, but just to be equivalent to where African Americans in the rest of the country are. That difference, at the time, these are updated numbers, at the time of that study, that difference was $3,000. That $3,000 they estimated would be the equivalent of $4 billion for our economy. It would lower homicides by 30%, and it would lead to 83,000 more students enrolled in colleges in the city of Chicago. $3,000 of household income. Now the gap is greater. To my point, we don't have the luxury and the time to wait. The problem is getting worse. Disparity is getting greater. But those areas, learn, earn, return, is where I would focus the demonstrable amount of my efforts in the civic community, as a philanthropy, as a nonprofit, as a political leader, as a person who's just concerned and saying, where do I help? That disparity in those three areas is where we need you.
Kurt, in light of the Republican control of the White House, the House and the Senate right now, how does that impact on some of the points that you were raising and what might happen in the city of Chicago?
Well, one issue we have right now is the tax bill, which one version of the bill eliminates private activity bonds, which means we can no longer enjoy tax-exempt status to support hospital expansions or affordable housing or industrial revenue bonds to help a company expand in blighted areas. That's one of the issues that's on the table, that if it goes away, we're in trouble. Here, another one that sort of snuck through that may be set to expire at the end of next year is the use of new markets tax credits. We had over $400 million in new markets tax credits in this region last year. Since 2010, there have been 83 industrial projects like the method plant on the far south side of Chicago that would not have gotten done without new markets tax credit. If those expire, as would be allowed in both bills at the moment, at the end of in the middle of 2019, we lose what has been a $500 million economic engine to actually do this work outside of downtown Chicago.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. It's from Jeff Jenkins, City Club member. It deals with the Chicago Public Schools and your thoughts about having an elected as opposed to an appointed school board, particularly since Mr. Jenkins says the appointed board seems unable or unwilling to properly manage the behavior of two previous CEOs. Would you like to respond to that?
Yep, no problem. So when you run for office, you have to fill out questionnaires for the news organizations. And so a few years ago, I did that. And what I said then, I still believe to be the case today. An all-appointed school board is not the solution that we need for our children. An all-elected school board is also not the solution that we need for our children. I think that we should have a board that has appointments and that has elected members. It ensures public accountability, but it also ensures efficiency in decision-making and a connection to the fiscal reality of the entire city. We have conversations all the time with lenders about the city of Chicago and advancing credit to us and advancing credit to the Chicago Public Schools. We have conversations all the time about where we want to develop and grow in the city, and a school being there, a train line being there, a park being there. These things are interrelated, and they will never be completely independent. But they need to have real autonomy, real accountability to the public. And I think having a lack of elected members is a disservice to the students, to the children in Chicago.
Kurt Summers, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments today.